Good day. My name is Sepiso. Thank you for joining me. And today I wanted us to talk about loss of identity that we as South Africans find ourselves in. And I think that this could be the reason most of our issues and problems come from. This could be the root of all problems, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean like economic issues and most importantly social issues. I mean, in we were colonized obviously by American nations and European nations, and cultures and beliefs, ways of doing life was enforced on us through various ways, of which I don't want to mention because I will be just. But I think most of us know the most effective way that they got through to us. They got to us was through certain people, and then obviously once you conquer that those people, you've conquered everyone else, right? So right now, so we were colonized, okay, sharp, because most African countries went through this, but then they still find themselves still identifying with the way they did before the Europeans and Americans came to invade our space, right? But then why South Africa hasn't recovered and still is lost within all of after all of this, especially after democracy, right? Why is it still lost? Because most African countries has their identity with them, right? But then I think that obviously after getting our democracy in 1994, let's say a couple of years post that, we were still trying to get over what was happening before democracy. So we didn't have much time to, to remind of ourselves of what we were. We were excited for the freedom that we were now having, right? Because we were one of the few African nations that were having the kind of freedom that we did have, right? So all of that, the black people were allowed in certain spaces, certain jobs, certain roles. We were allowed almost everything, right? To be to have to own houses in certain places, to go to certain restaurants. Almost everything was opened at that particular time. So we were excited. We didn't have time to remind of ourselves of what we were and then try to revive that and try to stick with that. And then I think the biggest problem was the 2010 FIFA World Cup, because with the 2010 FIFA World Cup, what it did was, as we were a democratic country, what we did was, as also we were the first African nation to host a FIFA World Cup, our government allowed every African nation to flock into our country for this FIFA World Cup, event, to flock, documented, undocumented, but most majority of them were undocumented. And by that time, we still hadn't uh, gotten our identity back. We were still like everything was happening at a fast pace. We were still like, yeah, right? So now all of these African countries flock into our country, and then they actually like this because then, yes, bona, they were free from the colonizers, but then they didn't have a democratic system in their country, so they were still kind of oppressed and somewhat, right? The economy was not doing that good, so South Africa was a much better country to be at. So especially those that flocked in undocumented. They didn't return back home, right? So you can imagine by that time, we as South Africans are still confused. We still haven't recovered from what had happened before democracy. So we didn't have much time to recover from that. Now we're having people mixing with us. Now there's no way that you can regain your identity by mixing, like you diluting uh, what you thought you're gonna recover with other religions, beliefs, cultures, ways of doing life. And then at the same time, you still have those people that colonized you within your country, which is what I think caused all this misidentity. Because then right now we don't have an identity as South Africans. We don't. It's more of like a like we're floating. We're floating. We just mid air. We're floating. If you go to Botswana, Botswana have ways. The whole of Botswana have an identity. They have a way of doing life. They have their own beliefs, their own belief as a country. Obviously, when you break it down to provinces and regions, they have. But then, as a nation, they have a way of doing this thing called life. Tina, we were still like, okay, how do we go back to our the way that we were living? And then we get this thing called the FIFA World Cup. Now everyone is within our territory. We still like, and then whilst they're still within our territory, we're like, hey, there's Jollof, right? There's this. Oh, Nigerians do this. Obviously, to some extent, it's a good thing, but then it's really not, because by that time we still hadn't figured our way back into our roots as South Africans, right? That's why we found ourselves into these social issues that we find ourselves in today, because everyone is like mis 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 misled, misinformed. Uh, all of these things that are happening now, we find ourselves raising generations that are confused, that are like the better way of choosing how to live is to go back to the people that colonize us, which are the Europeans and Americans, because with them they can, you know, market and advertise their ways of doing life and religions and beliefs and cultures way better than the rest of the world. They do that. They have imposed the beliefs, and then they still market it very well. They still advertise it very well. So it's easy for someone who's confused, who's raised by parents that are still confused within their identity, to can go, okay, I'm not sure, like, these people, because my dad says maybe he's a Zulu, and then this is how we do life. But then I go to school with this boy, he comes from Angola, and he tells me about this and this. And then what's this? Because most of the people that I go to school with, someone is comes from Zimbabwe, and then this is their way of doing life. And then I'm caught up with between this. But then there's this that I can see on TV, on my cell phone, on magazines. It's because then they can market their cultures and beliefs and ways of doing life much better than us. I'm like, I like this. Yeah, I hear Friday from Angola says in them they do this and this and this, but then I like this. because I can see it on the magazines. Because obviously, as kids, we get inspired by things that we think they are far from us. The things that we see on TV, the things that we see on magazines, the things that we see on the internet, are the things that we consume on a daily basis at what conditions us, into whatever product that we find ourselves being today, right? So, right now, you find someone who can die, who literally can stand against anything and will crush anything that comes against a European system or belief or ways of doing life, or American system and beliefs and ways of doing life. Anything that goes against that, we find ourselves going even harder to that thing. So if you come in when and say, in Africa we don't do this, in South Africa we don't do this, in Ndebele we don't do this, I'm like, what the fuck? What do you mean? What do you mean? That is what? Uh, what do they call this? We are being oppressive. That is oppressive, right? But then you look at us ourselves of like, before these people came in, right? As Africans, we didn't feel like we were oppressing each other. They came to our territories, they oppressed us. And then once we got our freedom, they made us believe that the way that we were doing things is oppressive. So they came and made us slaves, like physical slaves, and oppressed us physically. Say you can't do this, you can do this. And then once we got to the point where we were reclaiming our physical freedom and whatnot, they figured a way to enslave us mentally and oppress us mentally. They made us believe that our way of doing things, the way we were doing them before they came in, is oppressive. Whereas they are the ones that came in and oppressed us and enslaved us. Now we find ourselves in position where we believe that the way that we were doing things, the way that we were raised, the way that we were brought up was oppressive. Now, you, now it's a difficult thing because we grow up knowing on our woman. Whatever that our great parents were doing, that was oppressive. But then, if it was oppressive, why were they much better than we are today? Why? Why were they much better? Why was society much better? Why did they grow great leaders? Why did they raise great leaders? I mean, if you look at the caliber of leaders today versus the caliber of leaders back then, the comparison is way, way different. You can't even compare, because then the caliber of the leaders of back then, it's much better than the leaders of today, right? You find Abu Mansa Musa, the people with great minds, the people that built the great pyramids, all the maths and science that we see come from Africa were the people from back then. So why were they smart and intelligent? Is because they were original within their African sense. Now we find ourselves confused that we can't even produce great things, great leaders, great minds, because even if we can say, yeah, but then there's what from what who's going to Harvard, that person is already, let's say, 60% of what they think, how they think, is European or American. So technically, it's not an African product. Yes, you were born in Africa, but then technically, the way you were conditioned, your information that is in your head, the way you were raised, you are technically a European or American child. Because then, even after we finish, we produce these great minds, we send them to Europe, meaning we don't have anything that is ours. And then, one thing about Europeans or Americans, once you go there, they will find you. And then that's why we find people like um, people that can be born and raised in Africa, but then they will be claimed there. Elon Musk was born here and raised here. Obviously, I wouldn't say he's African. He's like there's no African, none whatsoever within him. He's white. He's what but then he was born here. So he and Valley, he has the right to say he doesn't identify as African or South African. You are a colonizer, dog. So it's all right for you to feel that way. But then us as black people, even if we do raise such great minds, technically they are not our product. They are not, because the kind of information that we receive in schools, it's European information, it's American information. What about African information? Because we are made to believe and in in a way that our way of doing things, it's it's not working, it's less effective, it's it's delaying, it's old fashioned, it's oppressive, it's all of these negative things that they make us believe that we are. So I think that is why we find ourselves in a position that we we don't know our identity. Thank you for joining me.